Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WellMed Charitable Foundation. This morning we have Dr. Barry Jacobs, who's going to talk to us or ask us questions, and we're all going to have a discussion on guilt. Dr. Jacobs, would you introduce yourself, give a little history, and tell people who you are, and then just take it away?
Absolutely, and really a delight to be here as always. And I do see some familiar faces and see some familiar names, and I'm glad that you've come back. Um, so I am, as everyone said, I'm a psychologist. I'm outside of Philadelphia. I'm a former caregiver. I cared for my mother with vascular dementia and my stepfather with Alzheimer's disease. Much earlier in my life, when I was a teenager, I cared for my father with brain cancer. So, like many of us, I've had multiple caregiving experiences, and my career has been all about focusing on the needs of caregivers. And I do that as a psychologist, and I do work as a healthcare consultant. I do a lot of public speaking like today, as well as a lot of writing of articles and books. So if one of the things that I do have been doing since 2013 has been writing a column on family caregiving for the AARP website. If you put in AARP Barry Jacobs, it'll take you to the page they have for me on the AARP website. You'll see probably 15 or 20 articles of mine from the past few years to kind of give you a feeling for the sort of work I do. So I'm going to pull up my slide deck and we'll talk about what we're going to do today. Um, and let me just share this. Here we go. Okay, is that now visible?
Yes.
All right, and let me put that in slideshow mode. Great. Okay, so I'm going to ask. I mean, we're certainly going to offer some ideas about guilt, but a lot of this is going to be asking some questions about guilt because I think guilt is one of the most common experiences that caregivers uh, go through. I certainly, in my years as a caregiver and afterwards, I've dealt with um, a lot of guilt about maybe things that I did wrong, but also things that I should have done. So uh, we're going to talk about how to live with guilt. I don't, just let me state up front. I don't think guilt makes us better caregivers. Unfortunately, I think guilt often makes us feel worse about ourselves, and that doesn't help with our caregiving performance. So I don't pretend that all guilt can be, just eliminated. I don't think that's possible, but really a lot of what we're talking about today is how do we manage guilt, and if need be, if possibly use it to make us better caregivers rather than worse caregivers. Um, so, um, so here's what I have in mind more specifically. We're going to talk about what guilt is and why human beings have developed this capacity for guilt. We're going to talk about three common questions that I see come up a lot, and then we're going to entertain any questions that you have about guilt. Um, so before we jump right into that, and I already see that let me just check to see the messages. Um, Sound is low. Okay, Debbie, my voice is a little bit scratchy today, but I see your note here. I will talk a little bit louder, but you might also want to turn the volume up on your computer. So, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is coming out of this book, the AARP Caregiver Answer Book. It's co-written by myself and my wife, Julia Mayer, who's also a psychologist. This book just published in July, and has about 150 questions on all different aspects of caregiving, including lots and lots of information about guilt. So there's the advertisement for today, and we'll go on from there. So just for starters, and I'm assuming that most of you are using Zoom. For those of you who are on the phone, you can unmute and just and answer. But for those of you on Zoom, if you could put into the chat, on a 1 to 10 basis, in which 1 is never and 10 is constantly, how often do you have guilty feelings about some aspect of caregiving? And that could be things that you did or things that you didn't do for your care receiver. So let's see. Um, I see that Steve is a 4. I see Kay Schaff is a 7 or 8, depending on the day. Belinda's an 8. Anybody else? Any other takers here? Carol's a 5. Okay. I see both John and Kathy are 7s. All right. Any others? 8 is excuse me, Rebecca is an 8, depends on the day she's having. Debbie's a 5. Okay. Others. So what I'm seeing is so far we have a low of a 4 and a high of about an 8, which would suggest that um, and I see what you said, just said, Steve, and Robbie's a 6. Um, I, I I see that, most of us are experiencing guilt. I mean, that guilt is as I mentioned, very, very common to caregiving experience, and that most of our guilt is I wouldn't say at the tip top of the scale, but it is significant. If it's over 5 or 6 in my mind, it's significant. Okay, great. Thank you. And let's just one other question. At this very moment, how guilty do you feel? 1 is not at all, 10 is off the charts. Um, Maybe even coming to this presentation today, maybe you feel guilty that you should be doing something else, in which case you're going to give yourself a number. So let's see what we have here. Uh, K Shaft now is a 5. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Belinda's a 9. Feel like I should be with my dad and not working. Oh, okay. Kathy Mays is a 3. Robbie's an 8. Um, and again, we got a pretty broad range, but and Carol's a 6. John is a 3. Okay. So, some of us right now are actually feeling pretty darn guilty, and others are not as feeling as guilty. But I'm not seeing any 1s here, right? I'm not seeing, nor am I seeing 10s. So which is good. But so guilt is in the room. It's with us today. So let's start off just with some very basic questions. So how do you define guilt? And you are welcome to put something in the chat, or if you feel so inclined, you're willing to, if you can, if you're not in a very noisy place, if you want to unmute yourself and talk about how you define guilt, that would be great. But how do you define guilt? I mean, it's certainly a term that we all know. What do we mean by guilt? What are guilty feelings? Evelyn, can I put you on the spot? What are guilty feelings?
Well, I think I have guilty feelings many times where there's something inside of me. It feels like something's wrong, something I need to fix, something that's niggling, at my brain. And it may be that, a bill didn't get paid and I forgot about it. It may be that I was supposed to call someone because it was their birthday. Um, I'm not caregiving at the moment, but when I did do caregiving, it was I could never be at the nursing home enough, and when I went, my mother didn't want me to leave. She would cry. So, there's all kinds of different things that bring stuff up in you where there's this emotion, it's kind of a pressing of your chest together. It makes you feel like something's wrong.
Yeah, what I'm hearing, and I thank you for that. What I'm hearing is that it's often feeling that something's wrong or that you've done something wrong. If you commit a crime and you get convicted by a court and they tell you you're guilty and you're gonna have to have to be punished in some way, we that's pretty clear. I mean, if you rob a bank and they caught you in the red-handed, then you're guilty. It's not as clear with lots of other parts of human life. I mean, we sometimes feel guilty if we show up late at a meeting by 5 minutes, or if we didn't pick up the medicines exactly when we should have, or if um, we forgot we had promised to make a special dinner and we forgot to do it. Sometimes rather minor infractions can make us feel guilty. It's not nearly as bad as committing a crime. But it's this kind of inner feeling, as you're pointing out, Evelyn, of like something's off, something's wrong. I did something wrong, or I should have done something I didn't do, or had promised someone I should do. So let's see. I think that's we're talking about a very common human experience. So Debbie writes remorse for something we did or didn't do. Um, and I think that's very well said. Rebecca says self-blame or remorse for her actions and outbursts. Great. John says I took the easy way out when I could have done better. There you go, John. I mean, maybe the easy way out is you cut corners and perhaps you could have, as you said or done more, and you didn't. Or Carol says feeling you should do more. I think those are all very, very good definitions of guilt. I like this one, especially from Carol, feeling you should do more. I think that's something that caregivers feel a lot. We maybe, as much as we're doing, sometimes we don't feel like we're doing enough. And especially if the person we're caring for is still suffering in some way. Keshav says guilt is having to be the parent to your own parent. My mother is angry and resentful, and I feel guilty for, quote, taking away her independence, unquote. Boy, do I relate to that one. I went through this with my mom, who hated the fact that suddenly I was having some authority over her, managing her finances, managing her pillbox. And my mother was so angry that I was, in many ways, displacing her, taking her authority away from her, taking her independence away from her. And I had a lot of guilt about that too, even though, and I'm sure this is true for you, I knew it was the way that I could best care for her. If my mother couldn't drive anymore, couldn't manage her pillbox anymore, I had to do those things for her. But yet I still felt guilty that she felt angry about them, that she felt resentful about them. So there, in fact, we're not doing something wrong, but the person that is angry at us anyway, and that kind of causes us an automatic guilty reflex. Good. Those are great definitions. So here's the second question. Why do you think human beings have guilt? And let me put this in context. I mean, there's certain common human emotions that seem to cut across all countries, all cultures. There are folks that feel sad. There are folks that feel angry. There are folks that feel anxious. And there are folks that feel guilty. So why? So those are kind of built into human beings over time. But why? I believe that emotions have some survival value. Otherwise, we wouldn't have them. So why do human beings have guilt? How does it help us? Um, and let's see. Uh, what I see here is Robert says fight or flight complex, amygdala response. So amygdala is a brain structure, a subcortical brain structure that usually has to do with amygdala is usually involved with anger, not so much with guilt. Um, but I mean, I think what you're saying in a way, Robert, is that some of this may be encoded in our brains. That guilt is a response to situations that all human beings have because it's literally in our neurology, just like a fight or flight response is in our neurology. Todd says to learn better responses. Excellent. I think there's something to what you just said, Todd, that if we're feeling guilty, then we're striving to do better. We're striving to maybe get to the meeting on time or not forget the medicines or we're going to try to be better than we've been. Maybe we have remorse for what we've done, but we're now going to compensate for that by being better. Stacy says because they care, and that's an interesting comment too, Stacy, that we feel guilty because we care. And I guess my response to that would be, do we need to feel guilty to demonstrate that we care, or can we show that we care in other ways? Debbie says society has certain expectations of us, and when we don't meet those, we feel guilt. I think that's true. I think society as a whole does. I think our families do. And I think maybe most importantly, we have expectations of ourselves. And if we don't meet those expectations, then we can feel very, very guilty. Um, and sometimes that can be a problem because if our expectations are set too high, if our expectation is that we're going to be the perfect caregiver, and then nobody can be the perfect caregiver. And if you're not the perfect caregiver, then you may wind up not just feeling guilty, but going overboard and beating yourself up a little bit. And, one of my major messages for you today is beating yourself up doesn't help you. It doesn't make you a better caregiver. It just hurts you when you beat yourself up. John says social animals hold themselves accountable to the group for mutual survival. Wow, that is a really cool answer, John. And I think that that's right. I think human beings learn to be accountable to one another and survive as a species by forming groups. And those individuals in the groups are accountable to one another in large part through love, but then also through guilt that we feel we have to do something for the people, other members of the group, and that by that holds that group together. Good stuff, John. I like that a lot. Carol said it, feeling you could do more. Yep, absolutely. Steve says conscience. So conscience, and I think is right. I think we all have a conscience. We talk sometimes about a guilty conscience, and a guilty conscience is one in which we've done something wrong and now we feel bad about it. Maybe we, again, forgot to do something we should have done, or maybe, what I have heard over the years many times is caregivers who feel tremendous guilt, who have a really bad conscience because they lost their temper and they said things that they wish they hadn't said to the person that's receiving care, and then they have tremendous remorse and and then they have to work very hard to overcome that, either by making some sort of seeking some sort of reprieve from the person who they're caring for, or forgiving themselves. So great stuff. And the last thing I'm going to add, and I think we're not going to not actually spend a lot on this last question on this slide, because I believe you have already provided the answer, is why is having guilty feelings such a common caregiver experience? So to draw upon the things that you've already said is because caregivers care, because sometimes we end up uh, and maybe taking over certain responsibilities from the care receiver, then that makes them feel bad about themselves. And we consequently feel guilty that we're taking some of that person's responsibilities and some of the person's feelings of competence away from them. So even though we're doing the right thing by caring for them, making sure that they're safe, say, for instance, not allowing them to drive anymore, then we still feel guilty that it entails a loss for that other person, and we're responsible for implementing or inflicting that loss upon them. So these are, I think, and then to follow up on what John said, is that if we're thinking of human beings surviving through time as a tribe, and we think of families as a kind of tribe, then when we feel guilty to one another, then that tribe survives better. And when a family member is hurting in some way because they've gotten older and they need help, or they have some kind of disability, or they have some sort of acute illness, we feel guilty toward them, and as a way of being accountable toward them. It kind of bolsters our feeling that we should care for them. So caregiving again is so common to the caregiving experience. It's gonna be guilt is so common to the caregiving experience, and I think it has pluses and minuses. And I'm going to go back to those pluses and minuses in just a moment. I just want to see what else is in the chat. And uh, I see who's this? Steve says there's so much to get wrong. Um, well, I would say to you, Steve, I think that's true of pretty much anything in life, including caregiving. Anything that we're doing that's new to us. And if suddenly I said to you, guess what, Steve? You may never have played golf before, but we're going to go play 18 holes right now. And here are your golf sticks and your golf clubs. I'm calling them sticks. I know very little about golf, excuse me. But here's your golf clubs, and you're going to figure out which club you're going to use to hit the ball certain distances, and then you're going to figure out, how you stay out of the bunkers and how you stay out of the rough. And what I'm going to tell you is you're going to get a whole lot wrong. And if you think about caregiving, as you're like a new golfer, you're hitting off the tee. You've never done it before. You don't know a three wood from an iron, and now you're trying to do this right. Well, the truth is, you're not going to get it right at the beginning. You're going to learn a lot first before you get it right. Just like someone who plays a lot of golf will figure out which club to use when, how to hit the ball in certain ways to get it to where you want it to go. Um, and then I see Robbie saying not doing enough, resenting the role. We're going to get to this, Robbie. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on resenting the role. I'm going to get to that. I'm not going to address this now because we're going to have a question specifically about this. But before we go on to some of the three questions that I mentioned, let's just talk a little bit more about the pluses and minuses of having guilt as a caregiver. So the plus is it may put more pressure on us to do a good job, to be accountable to the person that we're caring for, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to care for them, and that may in that way help us be a better caregiver. Um, it may it may also just correct some of the mistakes that we make. I mean, especially at the beginning of our journey as a caregiver, we will and do make lots of mistakes. And when we feel guilty about those mistakes, then we're gonna try harder the next time. So those are potential pluses. Here are some potential minuses. When you are feeling so guilty that you are beating yourself up, you are not going to make yourself happy. You're not, and I believe you're not going to make yourself a better caregiver. If you're too hard on yourself, if you set the bar for your caregiving performance too high, all you're going to do is bring yourself down. And so guilt can help, and I also believe guilt can hurt. In my work as a psychologist, a lot of what I do is to help, number one, people understand that guilt is a normal reaction during caregiving. But number two, help them understand that if they're beating themselves up, it's not making them a better caregiver. If they feel guilty, the care receiver doesn't suddenly say, "Well, I'm so glad you feel guilty. I feel so much better now." That's not what happens. Um, and so I want to help people modify, ameliorate the guilt, at least to some degree, so that the guilt may be enhancing the performance, but not detracting from that performance. Any thoughts about that, Evelyn? I mean, what in your work as a therapist or in your personal experience, what are some of the pluses and minuses you've seen with guilt?
Well, I think a big minus that we haven't quite touched on yet is the fact that some people don't want the role and resent having a role. There are other people who are like owning the role so much that they won't let others help because nobody does it good enough.
Two great points. And the first point about resenting the role, Robbie just brought that up, and we're going to get to that in a minute. The second point that you just made, that people become so identified with the caregiving, and they feel like if they were to let anybody else do it, then that would make them feel guilty. If they were to take respite, a little bit time away from caregiving, then that would make them feel guilty. So they take over everything, they control everything, and they never let up. And the problem there is if you never take any rest and you never get any help, you're going to make yourself more likely to burn out. And if you burn out, you're just not going to be as good a caregiver as you would have been otherwise. And so if you feel too guilty, you're just not going to pace yourself very well. Let's see, we got two more comments in the chat. Um, and let's see. Uh, And I see Jay says guilt is a focus on myself, not my loved one. Arguably, it is a self-serving response. So if you could talk a little bit more about that, John, I'd love to hear what you mean when you say it's a self-serving response. And Tiffany says, "Hello, everyone. Hope all is well." And Tiffany, I hope the same for you. And today we're talking a lot about guilt. Um, so, John, you might want to put some further thoughts about how guilt could be self-serving. Um, but let me come to the three big questions that I think are worth contemplating. So, the first one is something that we've already touched on, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. No matter how much I do, I still feel guilty for not doing enough or doing the wrong thing or not keeping my care receiver happy. How do I get rid of all this uncomfortable guilt? So what are people's thoughts about this? And again, if you prefer to unmute rather than put something in the chat, it might be a little bit easier. This is a little bit more complicated question than the ones I've been asking thus far, but just feel free to unmute, just so long as you're not in a very noisy place. Any takers here? Okay, see one response, and I see Robert saying honestly medication. I'm not sure what you mean there, Robert. Um, so when you say honestly medication, feel free to expand on that. Debbie says, create realistic expectations and forgive yourself when you don't totally meet those expectations. That is great. That is absolutely great. I love that. Um, and Robert says antidepressants have helped me manage my guilt. And thank you for that clarification, Robert. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But so Debbie's saying create realistic expectations. So what are realistic expectations? How do we know what is realistic? What is realistic for being a caregiver for your care receiver? How do you know what's realistic? How do you know what's unrealistic? I think the answer to that is we have to learn about who our care receiver is. We have to learn about their needs. Some of it is going to have to do with their condition. Some of it is going to have to do with their age, and we're going to have to then gauge what their needs are, and then we also have to assess our capabilities. I always talk about caregivers have to determine what they are available to do, what they're able to do, and what they're willing to do. If you live halfway across the country and you only can come visit your mom 3 times a year because that's all you can afford, you're only available certain times of the year to be there to help in a hands-on way. That has to be realistic for you. You can't beat yourself up because you can't come more often, or you can't leave your family in a different part of the country and move to where your parent is. That's not realistic without causing other difficulties for you. Not everybody is able to do certain things. When my mother was caring for my stepfather who had Alzheimer's disease, and my stepfather often had falls, and my mother would try to pick him up and she had a bad back and she would hurt her back even more trying to pick him up because she was not physically able to pick him up. And then she would get angry at herself that she wasn't no longer physically able. There might have been a time in her life when she was younger when she was physically able, but she had an unrealistic expectation for herself that she was going to be able to pick him up off the ground, off the carpeting when he fell. And that just wasn't happening. And that was something that was very hard for her to accept. And the third thing, which is the hardest part, and things that the aspect of choosing how much caregiving you do, which causes the most guilt, is what you're willing to do. And all of us have the opportunity to determine what we're willing to do. And we may not all make the same decision for our care receiver. That we don't have, we're not required to be willing to care for every one of their needs. We can pick and choose what we are willing to do. We may not. When I was caring for my mother, I was not willing to shower her. Right? She didn't want me to shower her, thankfully, but I was not willing as her son to shower my mother. And there were other sons who would say, yes, they are willing to do that. And if it's necessary, they were going to do that. But personally, I was not willing to do that. So I drew the line there. Should I have felt guilty that I wasn't showering my mother? I don't think so. But if I had unrealistic expectations about myself, maybe I would have felt guilty. But I drew a line that made a difference for me in my caregiving for her. Kay Schaff says you have to find trusted third parties to vent to or self-help books to read. I'm searching for a group support network. And and there are many, and I would think uh, there are perhaps people on the chat here who could recommend some. John says, rather than doing better, I can play the martyr role and worry about myself. Shrugging off the mistakes, failure, and poor performance allows me to A, learn and B, improve and do better. Baseball batters fail 65 to 80% of the time and get rewarded for it. I love the baseball. I love baseball, right? Because baseball is a wonderful sport, but I love this analogy that a good hitter only gets a hit 3 out of 10 times. A bad hitter gets a hit 2 out of 10 times. if we expect that we're going to get a hit every time we get up to the plate, we were going to be a very unhappy and a very guilty feeling baseball player. If we expect that we're going to get hits 5 times out of every 10, we're going to be an unhappy baseball player. We have to be realistic about what is like we're likely to accomplish with our capabilities. I also, if baseball is not quite your analogy, if you want to choose basketball, the example I use is if you're a free throw shooter and you're able to hit 7 or 8 free throws, foul shots out of every 10 that you take, you're a pretty good free throw shooter. If you hit 9 out of 10, you're a very, very good free throw shooter. If you got, but to expect yourself to get 10 out of 10 is just simply unrealistic. There's never been a player in the history of the NBA who's shot every free throw correctly. So you're going to make mistakes along the way. And so again, we have to be realistic about what we can and can't do. Debbie says I facilitate an online weekly support group, and there, Debbie, there's the answer for you, K Shaft, to find a group. It looks like Debbie can help you. Let's look at some other parts of this question. So the idea about not doing enough has a lot to do with what doing enough means, and that has to do with our expectations. The other piece of this question is doing the wrong thing. And I can't, I mean, I think the golf analogy was a better one for maybe this part of this question. We will hit the ball in the rough if we're a first-time golfer, or even if even if we're a very experienced golfer, we will hit the ball. We will hook it, we will slice it, we will put it in the drink, in the lake, if, on occasion. That is the wrong thing in golf, but we will do that because that is part of golf and that is part of caregiving. There are times when I literally, would forget to pick up dinner because I was just so frazzled. And my mother would, then I would get there. And my mother says, "Where's dinner?" I said, "Oh my Lord, I forgot to pick it up, and now I got to go back out again." And I would, and my mother would then have to wait for me to come back, and she'd be hungry, and I would feel terrible about that. That would be the wrong thing. There were times when I would forget that we had an I it wouldn't she it wasn't she who forgot that we had an appointment. I would forget that we had an appointment, and that was the wrong thing. But I could beat myself up for that. I could feel very, very guilty about it. Or I could say to myself, geez, I wish I hadn't done that, but I'm pretty, tired and I'm doing too many things. I've got too many balls in the air, and I'm just going to have to forgive myself for doing the right thing. And the last thing here in this clause here is not keeping my care receiver happy. And this is the part of caregiver guilt that I often find most difficult. We can do all sorts of tasks to help somebody live better, to help them live safely, but it doesn't mean we can keep them happy because sometimes people can be well cared for, but they're resentful that they're even being cared for, or they're resentful that they're now 85 years old and can't do what they used to do, or they're resentful that they have a disability, or they're just not happy with the fact that their life has changed from the way it was in the past. And we do our best. We can do our best to care for them. We can do our best to comfort them. We can do our best to entertain them. We can do our best to everything we can to keep them happy, but we cannot guarantee that they're going to be happy, nor ultimately can we be responsible for their happiness. And if we are gauging the success of our caregiving on how happy our care receiver is, I think we're going to feel guilty a lot because many care receivers, because of the life circumstances they find themselves in, are unhappy. Does that make sense? Evelyn, does that
Some
make
even
sense?
start that way. Some people just start as unhappy people.
Well, that's absolutely true. If their baseline, somewhat times, if their baseline is unhappy, then our expectation is, well, they're just going to be unhappy. And so we don't may not put as much pressure on ourselves, but if they were happy and because of the losses that they've incurred, they now are feeling unhappy, then that can be very hard. And we may feel like, oh, well, we got to do something to help them feel happier. I see a comment here. This is let's see. This is from Cindy, who says, I truly believe that you can only do what you know. If you don't know, you don't know. Once you do know and know better, then you do better. You have to allow yourself grace. really well said, Cindy. I also love the oxygen mask analogy for caregiving too. So we all know that kind of cliche analogy about, put your own oxygen mask on first, and I think that's a perfect thing to do. But I'll also tell you that there are many caregivers who will feel guilty putting the oxygen mask on first because they feel like their primary responsibility is to the care receiver, not to themselves. But as I think you're suggesting here, if we don't put on that oxygen mask first, then we can't take care of anybody, everyone else. So part of this is, do we take the time for ourselves to care for ourselves so that we can do better for others? But I just also want to underscore the word grace. We have to be kind to ourselves. It's very easy as a caregiver to be kind to the person we're caring for, but less kind to ourselves. We can hold ourselves to standards which can be kind of harsh, and we can, as I keep saying, we can beat ourselves up way too readily. Um, I will also just say in terms of if you, once you do know and know better, then you do better. And I think that's true. And that comes with experience, it comes with education, but it also that doesn't mean we aren't still going to make mistakes at times. We will make mistakes at times because that is part of being human. And when we make mistakes at times, again, we have to allow ourselves grace. So I think that's really well said.
Did you see Claire's up a little bit?
I'm sorry, say it again.
There was a message from Claire.
Oh, I did not see Claire's message. Ah, there it is. Thank you very much. Claire says it's hard to help my husband when he is fighting my assistance in every way. I believe he resents needing my help. He won't allow um, me to ask for outside help as it's nobody's business. He apologizes. I'm sorry, I'm not doing so well with scrolling today. I'm all over the place here. Let me come back to that. Um, all right. He won't allow me to ask for, I believe he resents the email. He won't allow me to ask for outside help as it's nobody's business. He apologizes before sleeping at night for being so tense. It's hard, but I care. And what I would say to you, Claire, is you're in the boat with many other people. I have heard many people say this. I certainly experienced this with my mom, who was my primary care receiver. We do our best, and we do our best because we care about the person, but that doesn't mean they're going to be happy. It often means they're going to resent us because we're doing for them. And that's an awfully hard thing for caregivers to take because you're making sacrifices on someone's behalf, and it would be wonderful if they said thank you or they patted us in the back. Um, but that is not always the case because they are unhappy and they are resentful. And um, and that makes caregiving harder, and it may make us feel guilty at times. And here we have to show ourselves grace that we're not going to make this person happy, but we also have to show them grace that because of their sense of loss, that they may not be as gracious themselves in being grateful as we would like them to be. And instead, they're just feeling bad about being in a position of having to receive care. And I'll just add, Claire, your husband is very lucky to have you. And if he can't always express that, probably everyone on this call is appreciative of what you're doing and knows
Hey,
that you're devoted to
Claire.
him. Yeah.
Hey,
So,
Barry, what about the issue of care receivers who refuse to have people in their home when you really need help?
so my short answer to that, and this is covered in the AARP Caregiver Answer Book, is that you can honor your responsibility is to care for someone to ensure their well-being, but your responsibility is not to be to do caregiving in exactly the manner that they prefer. So they may say, I want you and only you being my caregiver. I don't want, anyone else in the family to coming in. I don't want our adult children helping. I don't want this or that. That doesn't mean that they get their choice. It means that you can say, I'm here to help you, but I need some latitude to help you in a way that's sustainable, that's doable. And that applies also to having people come into the home. What I usually say to folks is, you say to the care receiver, you need to do this for me. I need you to try this for a month to let somebody come into the home. You think that person's a stranger. Hopefully, after a month, that person won't be a stranger to you because you'll develop a relationship with them. And most of the time, that's what happens. So I don't I don't give into this idea of no, I'm not going to let anybody else in the home, that you, and only you can do this. I don't think it's a good idea to give into that personally. Um, what are your thoughts, Evelyn, before I go on?
Well, I think it's tough because I know people who actually, when a caregiver comes to the door, and the care receiver sees this person who's coming in to help take care of them, they kick them out. They tell them they don't want them there. They tell them
Yeah,
to get the heck out of the house. So it's a very touchy situation.
it is very touchy and it requires a lot of conversation between the caregiver and care receiver. But again, as a caregiver, I would say to a care receiver, I need you to do this for me. I need you to try this for me. I need help. This is a way for you to help me. It's not just always about me helping you. This is a way about you helping me. Please at least give this a try. And I haven't seen too many caregivers turn that down. And the catcher says, I always tell caregivers I work with, the help is for you, not for your loved one. Tell them this will help you help them. You're actually repeating the point I just made. So thank you very much.
Right.
I'm taking a look at the time and I see we've already talked about a lot of aspects of guilt, but we're running behind. And so let me move on to the next question. Just the last part of this question. How do I get rid of all this uncomfortable guilt? I don't think any caregiver is going to get rid of all this uncomfortable guilt. The idea here is we want to mitigate it as much as we can. Second question, how can I take time for myself and have any fun if my care receiver can't do those things? If my care receiver is suffering, I would feel guilty if I'm not suffering at least a little bit too. I have heard this many times from caregivers that if their care receiver is unhappy, then they don't deserve to be happy. And my answer to that is, does your care receiver want you to be unhappy? Is that what you're saying? That they would somehow help them if you're unhappy too? And what I would say is taking time, if you don't want to have quote unquote fun, then you can look at taking time for yourself, taking respite as a way of replenishing yourself so you can continue to do the caregiving that you're committed to doing. Because if you don't take time for yourself and you don't replenish yourself, you will eventually burn out and then you won't be able to be the caregiver you want to be. What I try to do is put the guilt on the other foot. I basically say if you don't take time for yourself, then in fact you should feel guilty because you're undermining your ability as a caregiver, and taking time for yourself is the right way to caregive. Any thoughts about that question or that answer? And again, feel free to unmute if that would be easier. What do you think about this one, Claire? Excuse me, not Claire, Evelyn.
Well, I think that so many times we hear people um, who talk about the guilt of going out and having fun and coming back and seeing their loved one just sitting there looking depressed, without anything, that they feel like is fun to do. And we've had a lot of other people who were on those calls that talked about, getting the fun in there for them too. Whether it's just a kid to come in and read to them, or whether it's a respite worker that they can play cards with, or have somebody to play music for them, but not to take it on yourself that you can only have fun if they're having fun.
Yeah, I think those are great ideas. I also think, again, you can bring in people to read, you can bring in people to entertain. It doesn't mean the care receiver is going to have fun. They may
Mhm.
still be unhappy, and that their unhappiness isn't a limit to whether you are able to take time for yourself. Is still what I would say.
Right.
Yeah. And let me any other thoughts about this question about taking time for yourself or having fun if your care receiver can't do those things? So let's see what we got here. I don't see any. I thought I saw a comment. Now I don't see a comment. Excuse me.
Cindy says, depending on your location, there could be senior volunteers that could go sit with your loved one and provide them with socialization.
Again a great idea. But I would say, you can make that effort, but ultimately, if that still doesn't make them happy, you still shouldn't feel confined to the home. You still you still should be able to leave and leaving and doing other things, taking respite is essential for you, is what I would say. But those, thank you for those comments.
Caregivers get isolated. When you get isolated, you get unhealthy. It affects your immune system. It affects everything.
Absolutely. Um, let's do one last question and then we'll just kind of open it up for any thoughts about guilt. I'm exhausted and miserable a lot of the time because caregiving is so hard. I feel trapped and I want to escape. Does this mean I'm a bad person or that I don't love the person I'm caring for?
Wow.
Again, a lot of parts to this question. So one version of this question, I saw Robbie had this earlier, and Evelyn, you brought it up as well, is this idea of people who take on caregiving and resent the role from the very beginning. Maybe they feel that this role has been foisted upon them, that they didn't really choose it. There's research that suggests that when caregivers feel that they didn't choose to be a caregiver, they were forced to do it, they're much more unhappy. Um, but there's also this idea that people may choose willingly to be a caregiver at the beginning, but over time, just as you're saying, Evelyn, they become very isolated, they feel trapped, and then they have all sorts of fantasies about escaping. They think to themselves, maybe it would be a good thing for my care receiver to die. And then they said, "Oh my God, what's wrong with me? How could I think something like that?" And they get very, very guilty for having thoughts like that about wanting to escape. And even if, and especially if escaping is a result of their care receiver dying. And so people ask or feel that they're a bad person and they wonder if they don't love the person they're caring for. So let's see. I see one comment in the chat here. Um, Claire says, my doctor has referred me to the local counselor and older adults to a program, Powerful Tools for Caregivers. I'm looking to ask one of his truck buddies to visit while I'm attending the meetings. That's great. So Claire, you're responding to some of the things that I was just saying about taking time for yourself. Really good. And by the way, Powerful Tools for Caregiving is a very, it's a evidence-based, really well-known program. Many people benefit from it. I hope you enjoy it. And by all means, go out and get some additional education and be with other caregivers. I think it'll be very helpful for you. Back to this question here. If you feel miserable, does it because caregiving is so hard and you wish to escape somehow, does that mean you're a bad person and you need to feel guilty about being a bad person because you've done something wrong?
I think it means they need to ask for help. They need to reach out.
I agree. I mean, first and foremost, it does not mean you're a bad person. Feeling trapped, wanting to escape, in my experience, are very common caregiver emotions. Many, many people feel this way. Very few will put those feelings into words because it makes them feel so guilty to say those things to somebody else for fear that other person is going to judge them or that they're going to judge themselves. But it does not mean you're a bad person. This is really hard work, especially when it goes on a long time. People feel trapped. I felt trapped. I did this for 7 years. I hate this. So I couldn't wait for it to end. I didn't want my mom to die, but I did not want to do it anymore. And so what I also say is you can love the person you're caring for and you can hate caregiving.
Mm.
Hating caregiving does not mean that you love the care receiver any less. It just means that this is really hard work, it's isolating work, and you can really wear yourself down over time. And that to have fantasies of escaping, it doesn't mean you're bad. It really just means that you're normal, in my opinion. Other thoughts about this question?
I've heard this come up in support groups. And it's very interesting how people respond to it because I think that being a bad person as a caregiver is something that people don't like to hear. It's hard for people to hear. You can't be a bad person if you're providing care, X number of hours a day. But what it really means is that you're exhausted and you need some help, and you need to not feel guilty about not being able to do everything.
That's exactly right. I couldn't agree more. Sometimes people feel guilty that they feel exhausted. I mean, and which is so to me tragic. You feel exhausted because you've worked so hard. It's not because of any personal failing that you have or that you've done anything wrong. You feel exhausted because you're tapped out. And that's not a reason to feel guilty. That's a reason, as you point out, Evelyn, to get help. I see a comment in the chat and this is from John, accepting reality, living life on life's terms is hard for many of us. Accepting is not approving or agreeing. Wanting to escape is a warning message to get out for a while. John, you're saying the same thing Evelyn is. I absolutely agree with you. Living life on life's terms is hard for many of us. That I think is profound, and that's where I think grace comes in. Things go on in our lives, circumstances occur that we don't have total control over, as hard as we try to control things. And sometimes we have to just accept that this is what our lot in life is without approving it or agreeing to it. But accepting it does not mean that we just we don't have the opportunity to make other choices at times. And wanting to escape, even for just a little while with respite, is a normal feeling. And is that, as you point out, is a warning that we need to get more help. We need to step away for a bit. I think that you just said some very, very profound things. Looking at this question one more time, does this mean I'm a bad person or that I don't love the person I'm caring for? I keep saying it really bothers me when caregivers beat themselves up. Calling yourself a bad person, thinking that you're an unloving person, unloving family member, those to me are, the ultimate ways of beating oneself up. And I don't think any caregiver deserves that. Just as you say, Evelyn, if you're caring for someone, you're not a bad person. And you needn't feel guilty at all. See one other comment in the chat. And whoops. Cindy says, I love how you put that about how just because you hate caregiving doesn't mean you hate the person you're caring for. That is such a perfect way to put it. Cindy, I, 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 I don't think that any of us really hate the people we're caring for. We may be angry at them because they're miserable all the time, or they're demanding, or they're critical. But we made a commitment to care for them most of the time because on some level, we have some feelings of affection or love or bond with them. But caregiving is not something you have to love. Most of caregiving, a lot of caregiving is dirty work, helping people with toileting, with showering, with grooming. That's hard work with feeding somebody, with being tired all the time. There's not a lot there to love, in my opinion. But we do it because we want to help our family member, and there's a lot of good that comes out of it. But we don't have to love caregiving. We can still love the person, and we can hate caregiving. And I appreciate that I'm glad that you appreciate this point. Um, any other thoughts about caregiving, about guilt, or any other questions about guilt before we wrap up? I mean, I feel like we scratched the surface to this very broad universe because there's so many different aspects of caregiving that seem to provoke guilt in caregivers. And and it's always so tragic to me because caregivers are some of the hardest working, most self-sacrificing people they know, and they're also some of the most guilty people I know. Um, I see Minerva has launched the poll, so if you can, while we wrap up, if you could take a look at the session survey. Um, I just see one other comment. Stacy says, "What was the name of the AARP book you mentioned, Stacy?" And I'm only all too willing to share that. In the next slide, um, I've written 3 self-help books on family caregiving. The newest one, which came out in July, is the one on the left, the AARP Caregiver Answer Book, which covers a lot of what we're talking about today. A lot of not exactly exactly the same questions, but many similar questions to what we talked about today, but talks about guilt in depth. And then there are two other books here that I've written over the years. The one all the way on the right, I wrote 2006, and the one in the middle, I wrote in 2016. So I've been at this a while. But I do recommend the new book, the AARP Caregiver Answer Book. And thank you for your interest in it, Stacy.
I would also like to add, if you don't mind, Barry, that if you call your local area agency on aging, they can tell you if they have respite funds, they have a caregiver specialist that you can talk to, every single one of them. And you can also, as he's talked about, look on AARP or caregiver.org. There's so many places to get education and to get information about support groups. And there's a lot more online support groups these days. Ever since COVID, it's one of the things that really helped us out that, people had to do things online. So they began to really develop a lot. AARP, Alzheimer's Association, has a chat room, where you can put in your question and another caregiver will, say how they handled the same situation. There's just a lot you can look for. You can call 211 in your neighborhood. You can call the elder care locator or go online and put in your zip code. That's elder care at elder.
eldercare.acl.gov. But know what I would do is I would just put, because ACL, the Administration for Community Living, is going away, the website's going to change. I would put into some sort of search engine elder care locator, and it'll take you to it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for your participation. As always, this has been a great conversation on a really hard subject. Evelyn, I want to especially thank you. You really you brought a lot of your own insights to this, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. And all of you, I wish you less guilt, right? More grace, less guilt.
Thank you, Barry. You were wonderful. You always are. You get people to really, talk about their feelings and get it out there. We're going to have another speaker on the 23rd, and this is Shifting Perceptions, Steady Hearts, a compassionate look at Lewy body dementia, which, dementia care is in everyone's opinion, I believe, the worst kind of caregiving because you never know who's going to be there. So it's a tough one. Lewy body, and then on the October 29th, Texas guardianship, how to avoid it, how to prepare for it with an attorney. So look at your calendar, sign up for things. Then Barry, thank you so much. Thank you all who participated today for your inputs, your suggestions, your great thoughts. Also, I'd like to thank the WellMed Charitable Foundation for getting spectacular speakers like Barry, because they're experts in topics that, it's just, we all look at things a little different way. And he has said speaking of many profound things here today that I hope have helped you folks. I know it helped. I have learned a lot. So thank you, Barry. And I hope that we see you all in the next session. Bye-bye. All right, I am going to close us out here and hope that we all see you again soon. And thanks again.